Hello everyone, Palmer here, and today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite Delta Green scenarios of all time, the Star Chamber. Stay tuned, we'll be going into the tips and tricks I used to run it and what I did to make it so awesome. So right off the bat, Delta Green is a government conspiracy Call of Cthulhu spinoff that I would recommend anyone play. It's incredible. It's been great for all of me and my friends. Super fun, super hairy situations they get themselves in. But this is not one of them. This is a safe scenario. And the point of this scenario is to bring in your agents to be judging another team who had one of their missions go wrong, which can give your agents a great look into how a failed scenario goes, especially if they think they're all hot and the best thing to happen to the US government in a long time. So the point is to show them the stakes and what happens when they mess up, and maybe them will become one of these teams getting stared down in the face by another team. So it's very interesting, and your agents are actually going to play both themselves interviewing the interviewees and the interviewees both in current day in the interrogation room and in flashback format, reliving this failed op, which awesome, incredible roleplay moments. This scenario is worth running if you're okay with your players having a little bit more power, being able to set the scene, if your players are good at being argumentative. 10 out of 10, probably my favorite Delta Green scenario I've run. I've run quite a few. I think this is an incredibly well-written scenario, but let's get into it. So this scenario gives you a breakdown of scene by scene. This is going to be way more of a movie scenario than a lot of other topics. It's not very open. It's very railroad, which is on purpose, and I think treats it very well. The page numbers are actually messed up. This is my copy from the United at the Opera, with full of great scenarios, but it's the same thing on the written page. So just keep in mind that the page numbers at the end are not accurate and relate to just the scenario themselves. Hopefully the fix in the future makes it a little easier to tab through. But in preparation, what I did is I went through and tabbed every single scene in my book, so it was really easy to flip to. And I generally found that you're going quick enough from one pace to the next. So the scenario also calls out a bunch of references of things that it's referring to, which I would definitely say it's most like Rashomon, because you're dealing with different stories, and if who's telling the truth you don't really know, and you're encouraged as the DM to like push that fact. And it goes into some things your team should know, which I printed out. I actually printed out this stuff on the Burma, and I even referred to, I didn't let them know this, but I actually took this chart from way earlier in the module. If we go all the way to the first scenario in here, reverberations, it actually supplies you with a chart, which I'll cut to in a second. So there's this chart located on page 8 of Night at the Opera. It's a part of the reverberation scenario if you have that separately, but I actually printed off this chart in the book and handed this to my players at the beginning, covered up. You can't really see it, but like this, I covered it up, and that they could just know what if they had certain percentages in things, what they would be able to see. And this was a great sense of mystery around these people, because we've never encountered the Chichua or Alclo before in our campaign. So it was great to already get them wondering. And we even had some players in their downtime, because I showed them this before their downtime, even pick history just so they could learn more about these people. So getting back into the scenario itself, your players are going to be controlling 2 agents, like I said. And I am of the firm belief after running this that you need to prep your players beforehand, which I did. I did not surprise them with the scenario. I did not let them walk into the interrogation room and say, aha, here's your other characters playing, because there's a lot of information. A lot of it is pretty nuanced and well written that your players will want to get into it, and definitely not feel a time pressure of, I have to read this while everyone else is waiting at me, or we're all sitting together at a table. Definitely hand this off beforehand. These are all the intel in the back and what they think of other players. And I have to say is that my players that definitely did their homework and read this and read it again and read it again had a much better time than my 2 players, I would say, that didn't take it as seriously or didn't read as much beforehand and spent a lot more time during the scenario, like kind of thumbing through the pages, looking for something that wasn't necessarily there, because a lot of it is truly imagination on the player side to make up and to perform these actions. And the players that did prep this and were ready going into it, along with me, like thought this was the coolest thing ever and had a great time. So I would absolutely 100% give this out beforehand, give it out a few days beforehand, give it a week beforehand, whatever you need. And I also wouldn't tell your players who the other players are going to be, because that really fuels that sense of paranoia. And I would tell them to keep that secret too, because they all came in not knowing who they're going to hate or who they're going to like, who's going to be on what team. I did not hand out this timeline either. I talked through this when the time happened because I figured that made more sense. And I also did trim these up and hand these out scene for scene as they were needed. These are like little cards that very fun, where it encourages roleplay and makes you like, oh, it's Toby's tale for Toby, and he's his own tale. He's fearless, decisive, and he gets plus 20%. And that was great at really setting the scene of like who's telling a story. And I would definitely recommend give them a chance to read this and getting into it, handing it out. I also handed these out beforehand, but I censored who got what so that I know who I gave it to, and I gave it to Jenny and I gave it to Toby, but I cut this out so that they didn't actually know who else on the team was as informed as they were about certain things, which was really cool and a really great moment to make them paranoid. Same with the about Alco, and I gave them they all gave them this primer beforehand as well. So definitely hand out this material beforehand, give them time to study it, answer any questions they might have. Definitely encourage your players to read it and versus just, I'll read it day of or I'll skim it, because there's lots of very, very nuanced information like who the mole is, which I would say the player who was the mole didn't actually realize they were the mole till post-game discussion, which was fun and interesting, but I think they kind of missed the mark on what the scenario was going for. But it was fun that they didn't know the mole, because it made the decision at the end of figuring out who the mole was very intense. So double-edged sword, because I really do think it is entirely nuanced. Another thing I also did was whenever the scenario mentions language, like, something in different language, only one or two players around the table, their characters would know. And of course, this is their secondary characters I'm referring to. I printed out the text of the language, and I even took out whatever they didn't need to know. I handed off to them so that they could decide in character how much information to share. I mean, I love handouts. I love secret information. And this was great because it really let them play their characters and how suspicious they wanted to be, how much of a team they wanted to show. And remember, this is a team that fell apart. They need to be at each other's throats the entire time. And you need to encourage that tense role play and to keep stuff moving. Quick editing note here. I also did the same thing with Mona in her wheelchair, where I handed out what Mona is going to say and what she's going to do to the player who is playing Mona so that he could do it versus me reading it off, which I thought was way more effective of a scene. And I also gave it to Jenny so she could decide if she was going to tell the other players or not, which was I think probably one of the best paranoia-induced moments out there. And then I did that also in the follow-up down here with Toby standing up and cursing everyone and starting his story. I thought that was much better in the player's hands than in my hands. So a few things to keep in mind, just general tips while running this, and that is that this is not one story told from multiple perspectives. Every scene should keep it moving forward, and you really want to encourage the changing of viewpoints between scene to scene and call out discrepancies and what changes. And you want to make discrepancies as the DM running this. You want to make things look different per character's point of view, and you need to subtly reinforce whoever's telling the story that they are correct and their point of view is 100% accurate, and you need to help them because you want each player to really feel like as they're going through their secondary stories, like their secondary was the only sane one in this entire team, which is actually how every single secondary views themselves. And keep in mind, every single secondary is also trying to throw their team under the bus at every chance they can. And so you need to encourage that. You need to ask questions like, wow, were your teammates just messing around? You need to say that they were screwing around. Whatever you need to do, you need to make the other players that aren't the storyteller in the scene look bad, because it really encourages that narrative gameplay, and it kind of makes them frustrate each other when they're like, oh, I just can't do anything as this one secondary. Oh, I can't hit my shots. I get minus 20% secretly. And it really paints a great picture of this team just hating each other post-team. I mean, they know they're up for the executioner block. So, wouldn't you do what you can to get out of that? So the only thing I would have really done differently on my replay, because honestly, you should play this as much as by the book as you can. It's expertly crafted. The narrative is there. I'm normally one to fiddle and tinker and change things, but this is one I would recommend. You just need to read and reread and reread until it clicks in your head, and then you're going to be, oh, this is awesome. And you're just going to follow the book all the way down. It's very guided, way less open than most scenarios. You need to keep the scenes choppy and keep moving and end at good disorienting points. The one thing I would have done differently is on this cross-examination. It has you only play one team get cross-examined and then swap, and then not swap, but just go straight into the next story. I would have swapped them. I would have had 2 got cross-examined and then flipped and then had another 2 get cross-examined versus flipping in the next scene down. It's scene 3 and then scene 6, or I believe is where they do the vice versa swap, and honestly cut that. Just do 4 and 4 here. Just let everyone get a chance to cross interrogate, and then everyone do the exact same thing on this side versus splitting it among 2 scenes. I mean, you still want to have 2 scenes here, but definitely just have 4 and 4 to increase that tension and give players a chance to work out the frustration away to the primary agents. Great part. Even say, you're splitting them up, and you're bringing them all together to reinforce the story. So definitely just do 4, make sure they all get interrogated in this scene, and give everyone a chance to flex the storytelling wings. So just as a few more general things about this scenario, when it comes to the combat, don't be afraid just to hand wave a lot of stuff and have shots land. Do whatever you want. It's in flashback. You don't have to sit there and look up all the armor rules and enforce this and that. They're all pretty general right here in this section and give what they need to do. But again, don't be afraid this is a sensory experience. This is all about the scene you're setting. Like I said, this is way more of a guided movie than any open world Delta Green investigation. This is intense, and it should be. And if you get bogged down doing the exact distances, exact rules, exact who's in cover, who's whatever not, it could definitely kill the pacing of the scene. You just need something quick, violent, and deadly, because some people, they all know they're not going to die given that their secondaries are still in the scene currently. So let them be a little bloodthirsty. Let them do what they need to do, and don't be afraid to hit them once or twice to make them sweat. But they know they're not going to die, so don't worry about giving them fair combat rules, because they can't per the narrative. So a few final things about the verdict, where they're at the end of the scenario. They have to decide who they think the mole is and what they should do. You want to hit home that, yes, this team was dysfunctional. Yes, this team had its issues and has its bad members and bad apples, but truly they were just a team sent in to accomplish something that they didn't even end up doing, and they got terribly sidetracked, but they kind of still won at the end of the day. So it's a tough situation where they exposed people, they messed up, they left casualties, all this stuff, but in the end they ended up solving something not really particularly related to what they were there to do in the first place, and it just became a mess. And yeah, sure, maybe it was the program sent them in under-equipped, underprepared. I mean, the program loves to cut everyone off and keep everyone on a need-to-know basis, and guess what? The program failed them, and you need to hammer home that, hey, this is what happens when you mess up with a program. You get grilled, you get figured out who's going to get finger-pointed, and then you get shot in the back, because that's what Delta Green's all about. And you want this to stay in your player's head as a memory whenever they're getting a little too blasé about who they're talking to, or civilians, or they're opening fire at wherever in public. They want to know, oh, guess what? This could be you guys in about 5 weeks, and that's it. Lights out. And don't be afraid to really, boom, hammer it home. Might seem a little heavy-handed, but you need to let them know that, and when they make their terrible decision. So here's going to be my final thoughts on who the mole was, because the scenario doesn't actually lay it out super cleanly, which isn't a bad thing. I love how nebulous it is, because there's reason to believe that any of them, I mean, the question is who's at fault and who the mole is are 2 separate answers. And watching my team discuss that in real time at the end and realize that split was great. And they decided to kill everyone because they thought whose fault it was, and they couldn't figure out who the mole was, which is really interesting because one of them was the mole without realizing it. So I think the mole is Jenny. I think Jenny is the mole, given that when you read the background about her getting the wounds on her leg and getting obsessed with Alco, and just the way she talks about her allies she just uses them. She uses them, and she knows what needs to do to blame people, and that's exactly what the language does to you. And my Jenny player didn't realize that. And honestly, he was kind of upset at the end when we were talking, and he's like, no, Jenny's not the mole, which goes to show how well this is written. So I think that Jenny's the mole, and I wouldn't push your players to realize that. It led to some fantastic friction where my player who played it didn't even realize. But something to keep in mind. Of course, that's just my reading of it. It doesn't say here Jenny is mole anywhere, but that is my end. There's a little hint at the end that Jenny is up to no good, but I would argue that could either be seen as just a natural response to having that in her, or for truly nefarious goods. And it'd be really interesting to see how far you can take that with her if she makes it. And that's going to wrap up Star Chamber for us. Incredible scenario, very on rails. So read the book, read what you need to do. But I would recommend this to any Delta Green players that you just want a quick 2-hour banger in between serious missions to give your agents some time to cool off. It's good because you can insert home scenes both before and after, of course, like usual. So you want to give them a little more time to breathe as far as characters. And because this is a safe scenario, their characters are absolutely making it from one to the other. So it really did a lot for character arcs and figuring out what the trajectory of our agents were. And it leads great into the next scenario, Observer Effect, which I think I'll be reviewing next time. So let me know if you have any questions. Put them in the comments. I read them and do my best to respond to them. So thanks again for watching. Like and subscribe. And see you next time. Thanks, everybody.